There's a fascinating contradiction at the heart of spirituality, which is that on the one hand, it is, in a sense, about an escape from the story, an escape from the limitations and the confines of this world, uh, blissful bathing in absolute truth as opposed to the doubts, the constant uh, ignorance that surrounds our minds in this normal life. It is purity, simplicity, easiness. But it's also strangely true that to the extent one wants to consider action in this world, that the spiritual viewpoint enhances it and is in fact the key to the maximum, the best, the most creative. It alone allows the flow from deep within of new spontaneous responses that are unburdened by the usual anxieties. And this hidden way of doing things occurs when what appears to be the eye, what appears to be the mind, what appears to be the main attention is not focused on the world or goals. Not focused on the world, not focused on goals, not focused on the differentiation of things. At one level, if at that conscious, felt, I'm doing level, the attention is withdrawn from goals, calculations, what should I do, and instead is simply relaxed, which means to say, it is sort of in the unknowable, unstatable self, then to the extent we can say there is a body and mind, it's freed up in a sense to act in a different way. We quote unquote get out of our own way. So you have this paradox, this miraculous paradox of doing without doing, so to say. It's a kind of absent-minded doing. And you have this sort of idea in a lot of mystical texts and descriptions that are strange and fascinating, right? You have in the Tao Te Ching, for example, the idea of the sage who, doing nothing, nevertheless accomplishes everything. You have the idea in the Hindu text, the Yoga Vasishta, that the wise man acts like a baby who's half asleep, like a puppet, pulled this way and that way. You have the idea in some martial arts of kind of drunken kung fu master, right? The master who seems as if he's drunk and just accidentally happens to strike his opponent at just the right times. You have the idea, of course, that people are familiar with in so many activities of life of flow, right? Where if you're playing a musical instrument, or you're in a dramatic act, or you're doing whatever it is, whatever creative activity, productive activity that you are good at, right? There are those moments when we seem to transcend ourselves. Things enter that dreamlike space. We're exerting no effort. And yet, we're performing at our maximum ability. Now, the irony is, of course, the moment you expect this to happen, you want this to happen, you command this to happen, you're like anticipating, that prevents it from happening. One must let go of all such expectations and allow the bird to fall almost all the way to the ground, or even let it fall to the ground if that's what's going to happen. That ground may itself be the space of something deeper. But only when we let go is there the possibility of flight. A flight in a different way. The sage Ramana Maharishi was once examined in a court case. He was asked to testify about something. And they asked him at a certain point whether he was tired. And he said, "No, I'm not tired. You can go on examining me for days. The reason I'm not tired is because I don't use my mind." Which is interesting, right? Because he's answering questions. So clearly, at some level, an outsider might say, his mind appears to be engaged. And that's true. It appears to be engaged. But the subjective experience is different. The subjective experience is an absence from the usual mind. That very absence from the usual mind allows for the mind to act, in a sense, unimpeded by the idea of itself. And this, too, is the true authenticity. Those innocent impulses that happen when you aren't looking. Like a child isn't looking. Well, maybe sometimes they do, but often they're not. They're not looking at what they're doing in a kind of judging, instrumental way. They're innocent to themselves. And that's what allows a kind of pulse of fresh water to come out. This is the way of action of the enlightened person, which is to say, they have nothing to do with it. And that's why action happens all the better as a result. It's the way of the divine, which, like the sun, as it said in the scriptures, illuminates, causes things to happen by its mere presence, without the burden of this trying, this striving, this burdensome looking for, accomplishing some kind of objective. Which, ironically, isn't to say that those kinds of thoughts couldn't happen. But if they happened, they wouldn't be regarded in that light. They wouldn't be assumed into the usual egoic process. Even those thoughts of calculation, if they are not inserted into that unsayable egoic process, that process which if you look for it, it disappears, they're not problematic. No thought in itself is problematic. All thoughts are problematic only in virtue of their being identified with. But what is identification? Identification is mysterious and illusion. And when you look at identification, you can't find out what identification is. 'Cause identification isn't the thing. Identification is a magic spell whose nature cannot be seen. Because when you look for it, it vanishes so thoroughly that it never was. But this is basically the secret. Just like the Zen koan, which says if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If thoughts happen, actions happen, but internally one is, in a sense, turned away, absent to the world, absent to objects, absent to interests, calculations, anticipations. If one is absent to them, do those things occur? Even if they occur, they do not occur. Even if things are thought, those things are not thought. Because one is absent to them. One is not paying attention to them. One is not identifying with them. One is not caught up in them. However we want to say it. And as a result, those things flow in a different way. A miraculous way in which the best actions that you could possibly take occur without effort. And again, the moment this is done in an instrumental way, the moment this is taken and attempted to be used, that very instant it stops.